Oral questions by members.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Well, 18 months ago, the Premier promised tangible results. Instead, he's failed on every front. His legalization of open drug use has unleashed chaos. Meanwhile, 6 lives a day are still lost. At the same time, life has never been more expensive as he triples the carbon tax. This, despite the latest report revealing that BC's carbon emissions are going up. In fact, the NDP record is the worst in Canada. While British Columbians struggle to pay for gas and groceries, why is this Premier jacking up the carbon tax to 38 cents a litre and utterly failing to reduce emissions? Hear, hear.
Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We continue to have confidence in our Clean BC roadmap, and it continues to show results. The emissions inventory changes because the federal government doesn't have accurate data on methane emissions to establish a baseline many years back. They admit this in their report, which I wish the member had read fully. The report is really clear, and I'll quote from the report. Despite these technical estimation issues, the oil and gas industry in BC has consistently been shown to have one of the lowest emission intensities, emissions per unit of production in Canada and internationally. This is supported by the recent atmospheric measurements. The 2024 national inventory shows a more than 50% reduction in methane emissions intensity between 2012 and 2022.
Member supplemental.
Results? Results? The results are that this NDP government holds the worst emissions record in Canada, with emissions rising from 61.9 megatons in 2016 to 64.3 megatons in last week's report. Shame. While emissions in nearly every other province have declined during that period, under this NDP government, emissions are on the rise. Wow. The Premier promised results, but has delivered only increasing emissions and higher costs for gas, groceries, and heating. Shame. With families struggling to afford essentials, why won't the Premier adopt BC United's plan to give people a break at the pump immediately and exempt the carbon tax on home heating?
Minister of Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And British Columbians have a really good chance to evaluate our plan because we report annually through a climate change accountability report. Perhaps British Columbians could actually judge the opposition plan if they had one, but they don't, and neither does the Conservative Party. I wish the member opposite had read the full report, had read the full commentary of the federal government on the report. Because the report is very clear. The report acknowledges that their ability...
Let the minister complete his answer, please.
The report acknowledges that the federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada's ability to accurately establish a baseline that they used for calculating emission reductions is flawed. BC has the leading methane emission measurement methodology in Canada. Environment and Climate Change Canada has been clear. They want to work with us, and I'll quote once more. The expected upward revisions of pre-2020 emissions in next year's report would result in a larger reduction in intensity since 2012. The federal government is clear. They know they have a problem. They know we've got it right. They're going to work with us so they get it right too.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always remarkable with this government. They ask the federal government for decrim. It fails spectacularly. Now it's the federal government's fault for people using drugs on the streets. They ask the federal government to measure our emissions. It comes back that they're failing, And in fact, our emissions in BC are higher and going up compared to every other province in the country, and suddenly it's the federal government's fault once again, Mr. Speaker. It'd be wonderful if this government ever took responsibility for their failed actions. This government is simply incompetent at fighting climate change, just as incompetent as they are on the affordability crisis, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps if they hadn't funneled carbon tax dollars into their carbon tax kickback, they might actually have recorded some emission drops. Grocery prices have soared over 30% under this Premier's watch, and the Premier is hiking the carbon tax up to 38 cents a litre while emissions continue to rise. The NDP's Cost BC scheme has simply failed. So why won't the Premier adopt BC United's plan, remove the carbon tax on home heating, and give people an actual break at the pump for once?
Minister.
Honourable Speaker, I want to be really clear because the federal government has been really clear. Their methodology is flawed. They acknowledge it. They promise that next year they'll work with us so that it is better, and they say in their report very clearly that the result will show that this year's figures are not accurate and next year's figures will reflect the emissions that we've been experiencing in British Columbia steadily since 2018, 5% since 2018. The opposition, however, has no plan. The opposition thinks we should get rid of the single most effective measurement we've had to reduce emissions in British Columbia. They brought in the carbon tax. They watched the Conservatives turn their back on their carbon tax. They now are copycatting the Conservatives, but they can't hide from their record. They said when they were in power that they were proud of the carbon tax. It was effective. The now leader said if you want people to change behaviour, you put a cost to it and you ask them to consider shifting their behaviour. We've continued that. We continue to support British Columbians with a range of measures to support affordability, including 100% of the carbon tax increase going to low and middle income tax credits.
Member supplemental.
I think our emissions are rising just based on the government's lack of answers as we speak, Mr. Speaker. Here's some facts that the minister doesn't like to acknowledge. Carbon tax was capped at $30 a tonne. It was revenue neutral, and emissions were actually going down under our government. No longer revenue neutral. It's going up to $170 a tonne, or 38 cents a litre, and emissions are actually going up under this Premier. The minister can keep burying his head in the sand, but Cost BC scheme is a clear failure with the highest increases in emissions in the country. Everything is more expensive, and the Premier is still determined to hike to 38 cents a litre at the pump with his carbon tax, even though emissions are rising. And the minister might want to talk about our position or Conservative position. Let's look at the federal NDP position. The leader, Jagmeet Singh, and other NDP leaders like the Premier in Manitoba, Wab Kinew, they both abandoned the carbon tax. In fact, even the NDP leader in Saskatchewan said a few days ago, and I quote, "The consumer carbon tax is simply not on for us, and the carve-out around heating fuel was unfair," end quote. With the Premier completely isolated compared to the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker, why does he continue to push a failed policy instead of adopting Clean BC's plan to remove the carbon tax on home heating and provide real relief by removing the taxes at the pump as well?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're proud of the Clean BC plan because it's working and everyone in Canada knows that it's working. Years ago, prior to the Conservative Party taking statements and positions against the carbon tax, the leader of BC United said, "I think cancelling the carbon tax, my personal opinion is that would be a terrible mistake." And he said that because he was proud of it and it showed initial results. And it showed initial results right up to the point when former leader... Members. It showed initial results right up to the point when former leader of the BC Liberals, Christy Clark, turned her back on climate action, along with the entire BC Liberal caucus. In 2018, we brought in a solid plan. We started implementing the plan, and it's having results. 5% reduction by 2018, and we have a range of supports for affordability for British Columbians that they had not seen in 16 years of BC Liberal government.
Members, as a courtesy, when a question is asked, let's be quiet and listen carefully. When the answer is provided, let's provide the same courtesy to the other side. House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Teacher shortages across BC have forced schools to rely on uncertified teachers. The number of uncertified teachers in the province has tripled over the last 4 years. Portables have become a permanent fixture in many schools across the province. 20,000 teachers and 7,000 teachers' assistants will be needed over the next 10 years to keep up with growing enrollment, Mr. Speaker. The BC Teachers Federation has called on the government to create a comprehensive plan, remarkable that they don't already have one, to address the growing teacher shortage. Loan forgiveness and incentives for rural workers could vastly improve the outcomes for teachers, students, and the education system in British Columbia. It's a desperate situation in our public education system, the people on the other side claimed to support at one point. This government used to be that champion. We failed to see it while they've been in government. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Education, what is the Minister doing to ensure that we have a thriving public education system in British Columbia?
Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, member, for this question. We know BC is not the only province that is dealing with the labor challenges, and the education sector is also one of them. But we are in the ministry, but also talking to all of our education partners, very cognizant of the need to hire more teachers. That's the reason, Mr. Speaker, that we have added more teacher training seats since we formed the government, more than 300 new seats, teacher training seats, giving incentives to teachers to take on this profession, but also having some very special recourse to hire rural and Indigenous teachers. We have a very robust working group, of which the BC Teachers Federation is also part of, working very closely with our education partners, looking at ways how we can support, how we can bring more teachers, and also the teachers who are already in the workforce, how to support them so that they can also they are also able to mentor and train, have more teachers come into this really productive and really, I would say, very fruitful profession.
Member supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, BC is the only jurisdiction that we're responsible for, and the students, our kids in the public education system, are the people that we should be looking out for. And unfortunately, I've watched over the last 7 years a BC NDP government that claimed to be champions of our public education system allow it to erode under their watch, Mr. Speaker. We're hosting a FIFA event here in a couple of years. $150 million. Think of what $150 million could do to offset the cost of inflation in our public education system, Mr. Speaker, something that school districts across the province have been complaining about to this government they failed to meet. The operational costs of our school districts are going up. This government has failed to meet those. We've seen libraries in our school systems close. This government has failed to meet those needs. We've seen tech departments fail to upgrade the tech that our students need to be successes. We've seen this government fail to meet those needs. Look, they've made a commitment to FIFA that they're going to be able to profit from this upcoming tournament. We need to see the same commitment to our kids and to our parents. Mr. Speaker, this BC NDP government has barely maintained the status quo. To the Minister of Education, why is the public education system eroding under this government?
Minister of Education. Members, let's hear the answer, please. Members at the back side, please. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't agree with the member statement. Since we formed the government, we have been championing public education. Unlike the previous government, we have made the investments like no other. Since 2017, we have invested not just in the capital projects like till date, more than $3 billion just in the capital projects, but also in the public education, whether it is the operating funding, whether it is hiring more teachers. I just talked about the incentives that we are using for our rural and indigenous communities. With those incentives, we were able to hire 15 new teachers just in the last year, Mr. Speaker. I completely understand the challenges, the recruitment challenges, the labor challenges. We are very cognizant of. This is not, the BC is not the only jurisdiction that is dealing with it. It is a Canada-wide issue, but also global issue, labor shortage that we are facing. But we are working with all our education partners. But I just want to reiterate again, Mr. Speaker, that we have invested in public education that the previous government, the old government, did not do.
The House Leader of the Fourth Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, here in the Legislature of British Columbia, we marked the solemn day of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. This year, Yom HaShoah feels especially important as the conflict in the Middle East started by the barbaric Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th. It has spurred demonstrations here at home in British Columbia, Mr. Speaker. The demonstrations at the University of British Columbia and the University of Victoria are not innocent. They are marred with anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hate. Some members of the NDP caucus have disputed this fact, which is unsurprising considering the accusations of anti-Semitism in the office of this NDP premier, throughout his caucus, and in the New Democratic Party itself. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not too late. This premier has the opportunity to demonstrate that he has changed his approach by being straight up with British Columbians and taking clear, decisive action. My question to the NDP premier, through you, Mr. Speaker, will this NDP premier ask the University of British Columbia to remove the encampment at UBC where anti-Semitic protesters are intimidating Jewish students, are intimidating Jewish staff, chanting genocidal slogans, and spreading hate speech? Or will he continue to allow anti-Semitism to continue to go unchecked under his watch here in British Columbia?
Minister of Post-Secondary Education.
Thank you, Speaker. And our government has made our position very clear. University campuses have always been a place to freely debate ideas. But university campuses also have to be a safe place for all students, all staff, all faculty, especially Jewish students, staff, and faculty who are feeling particularly alone right now. We have made it clear that hate speech of any kind, including anti-Semitism, is not accepted on our campuses, and it is not accepted in our provinces, in our province. With my ongoing conversations with faculty, with students, and with the presidents of the universities, I remain confident that the universities have the ability and the tools and the policies in place to allow for a peaceful protest, while also ensuring that students and staff are kept safe. Our universities are working closely with local law enforcement to ensure that the protests remain peaceful and that campuses remain a safe place for everyone. Thank you, Speaker.
Member supplemental.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The establishment of the so-called Palestinian Solidarity Encampment was attended by the pro-Hamas group Samandon's leader, Charlotte Cates, an American who has been charged with public incitement of hatred and willful promotion of hatred, Mr. Speaker. Charlotte Cates' speech in support of Hamas in the vile terrorist attack which occurred on October 7th was called, and I quote, the most hateful thing he could imagine by no one else other than this NDP premier. In her speech, Kate praises the unimaginable violence, rape, murder, torture, and kidnapping of innocent Jewish people as heroic. My question to the NDP Premier through you, Mr. Speaker. The NDP Premier admits that Kate's speech is hateful, but what does he intend to do about it? Are these more empty words, or has this Premier asked Ottawa to deregister Sanandawan as a so-called nonprofit? And has he asked to deport Charlotte Cates, who is in fact an American citizen?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Speaker. And the celebration of death, of sexual violence, is abhorrent, and it is not tolerated on campuses. And that individual was arrested. Yesterday, we all stood in this House and talked about and remembered Holocaust and the events of October 7th. We talked about Never Again and how we need to continue to raise our voices and not be silent in the light of anti-Semitism. And that's why we have made our position very clear that anti-Semitism is not tolerated on campuses. It is not tolerated in our province. Hate of any kind is not tolerated. Our government is taking action. We believe that campuses remain a place to freely debate speech, while also remaining places for safety for students, faculty, and staff, especially Jewish students. We're going to continue to take action, whether it be introducing the Anti-Racism Act, whether it be enshrining Holocaust education in K-12, whether it be providing funding for community groups and organizations who are experiencing hate. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism, and we will not tolerate hate in this province.
Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, on a day of commemoration for Jews murdered in the Holocaust, the NDP member from Richmond, Queensborough, made deeply offensive remarks. He tokenized Jews, and he called concerns about anti-Semitism on university campuses inflated and unfounded. But he has faced no consequences. A double standard compared to the treatment of his former NDP colleague, the member for Coquitlam-Millardville, who was forced to resign by this Premier. When given the chance to show leadership and condemn these remarks, the Premier failed. Surely, he's had more time to consider the member's remarks and the community's reaction. I'll ask again, as I did yesterday, will the Premier condemn these hurtful remarks and mandate consequences for the member, or will he continue his double standard against Jewish people?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We have many times discussed in this House how we collectively have responsibility to push back against hate in any form. We have shared in this House the many actions that we've taken as a government since October 7th. We understand that there's pain and fear in community. We understand that. That's why we're taking the steps we're taking. That's why we provide additional funding for especially Jewish communities that want extra safety measures in place for their own communities. That's why we've taken steps on anti-racism with the legislation that we have to address systemic racism. Now, the members can discount how important that is, but I can tell you, as someone who's been...
Members, shh, members, question was asked. We all understand the gist of the question. Let the minister answer, please.
The member is asking me who's discounting. The member who asked this question was discounting Anti-Racism Act in his comments. I listened to his entire second read speech. He did.
Member.
He was.
Member.
He was. And, Honourable Speaker, but I can tell you, if the member from Prince George has a question, she should feel free to stand up and ask a question.
Members. Minister will continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Members will know that since 2017, we've been working on this issue. One of the first measures that we took on as a government was to bring back a Human Rights Commission, which was gotten rid of by a previous government. Honourable Speaker, we knew how important that independent office was. We heard from racialized communities. We heard from the Jewish community. We heard from First Nations community about how this office needed to be completely independent of government so they could truly be reflective of the needs of communities. So we've been committed to this, Honourable Speaker. Since we formed government, we're committed to this now. We're going to continue to work with communities to address any issues that come forward so that everybody can feel safe in our communities.
Members, Vancouver Langara supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the House Leader for the government continues to stand up instead of the Premier in this House to address my questions yesterday and today, I would ask the member to withdraw his incorrect statement, which is that I did not have the opportunity to speak to Bill 23 on second reading. I certainly look forward to the debate on committee stage on that bill, but because of other bills that I was addressing in other chambers in this House. But I will say this, that the government has no plan since October 7th to address anti-Semitism in the province. It's escalating to a crisis level. The Premier and this entire government has been missing in action. The measures that this government purports to have said that they've done are only to really provide supports for security to a community that's under attack. That's it. The other initiatives, as the member from Coquitlam-Larville has pointed out, are initiatives that were underway for some years before October 7th. The Premier's continued refusal to confront anti-Semitism in his party has consequences. For the first time in nearly a decade, the Jewish Federation of Greater Vancouver boycotted the annual Yom HaShoah commemoration at the Legislature yesterday, amidst ceaseless warnings about a spike in violent rhetoric from extremist actors. It's alarming that campus protest organizers at the UBC encampment, in the Premier's own riding, has been linked to terrorist groups like Hamas. But the NDP continues to promote fringe groups and tokenize Jews at the expense of Jewish students, faculty and staff who are scared for their safety. When will the Premier put the safety of Jewish students, faculty and staff ahead of NDP internal politics, protect those targeted by hate, and address the anti-Semitism within his NDP cabinet, caucus, and government?
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I won't take this time to share with the member his comments that he's made. I've got them here in front of me. But I will say that we know that there is fear within the Jewish community. We know that there's many that are scared. And that's why, Honourable Speaker, we continue to do the work we're doing. There requires a systemic change within society. That's why the anti-racism bill is important. But that's not the only thing. I've shared with this House on several occasions that there was the BC Prosecution Services updated their hate crime policy so that they could...
Member, let's be respectful, please, to each other. Please continue.
I've mentioned multiple times in this House the actions that we're taking, Honourable Speaker. This didn't just start on October 7th. The work here started when we first formed government to ensure that everyone felt safe in our communities, regardless of who they love, regardless of their religion, Honourable Speaker. This is something that I hope all members in this House value, and that we're continuing to work together to ensure that everybody in this communities, in our communities, in British Columbia, across the country, feels safe in our communities.
House Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Look, what the official opposition and the member from Coquitlam-Mallardville are trying to get at here with this line of questioning today is quite straightforward. You have a community, the Jewish community, which feels that they're under attack, and frankly, in many respects, they are. And so as we all heard at the Yom HaShoah event, or commemoration yesterday in the legislature, a very solemn date in the calendar to honor and remember 6 million victims of the Holocaust, and to acknowledge and remember the thousands of Jews who were slaughtered on October 7th, the language really matters, but so do the actions. And so the line of questioning that we have put to the Premier yesterday and today, which the Premier hasn't addressed, and the House Leader can get up and talk about initiatives and actions and things that predated the October 7th massacre. What we've been asking for this government to explain and for the Premier to categorically condemn are comments that continue to be made by members of his own caucus. Exactly. The member from Richmond, Queensborough, stood in this House yesterday morning on the same day that Jews and the Jewish community were getting together in the Hall of Honor. And he made comments in reference to anti-Semitism on campuses, and his exact words were, and I quote, that anti-Semitism on campuses is inflated and unfounded. Inflated and unfounded. So you can excuse the Jewish community and those of us that are trying to bring a voice to this in this place for not being willing to accept responses that talk about everything other than the words that have been uttered by members of the NDP caucus. So once again, on behalf of the Jewish community, on behalf of Jews who feel like they're under attack and are, will the Premier today condemn the comments that were made in this chamber yesterday morning, the comments from the member from Richmond, Queensborough, who said that anti-Semitism on campuses is inflated and unfounded? Will the Premier condemn those comments and demand that that member apologize to the Jewish community, and do it today?
Thank you, all members, for being quiet and respectful when the question was asked, and let's hope we finish the answer in the same manner. Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, we gathered with survivors and members of the Jewish community in the Hall of Honor to commemorate Yom HaShoah and the atrocities of the Holocaust. And I heard from people, and we all did as a government, of the fear that they're feeling about the rise of anti-Semitism in this province. And I want to make it clear that our government stands against anti-Semitism and the rise of it in this province. But it's not just that. We know that we have to use every tool in our toolkit to combat the rise of hate in our province and the rise of anti-Semitism. And we are doing that, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's the systemic racism bill that's before the House right now that will give us new tools that we've never had to train public service, to make sure that systemic racism addressed in all of our public bodies, whether it's funding directly communities across this province that are on the front lines of rising in hate, whether it's launching a racist incident helpline, which is a new tool for people to be able to report hate and get the support that they need. Meeting directly with communities has led us to invest in the Jewish community for their safety and their security. We've also just recently passed legislation to help keep kids in schools safe from protests. We also are investing in police training to respond to hate crimes. Mr. Speaker, we understand we need to use every tool in our toolkit to address hate in this province, and we are doing that and will continue to do that. And the Jewish community can know that we will continue that effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The bell ends the question period. Madam Clerk.